Good afternoon. Friends, family, loved ones, enemies, contributors, distractors. This is Kevin Lewis on the Blueprint. And this week's show is called The Face of Courage. And we're going to be talking about the courage that we seem to have lost somehow, some way, and somehow along the way. So if I ask someone, if I said, hey, what do you consider as courage? What is courage to you? Is it the willingness to fight? And I guess some may think that's what courage means. It's the willingness to fight, but it depends on what you're fighting for. Um, is it? Are you fighting over foolishness? Are we fighting with each other? Are we fighting over jealousy, ego? What's involved in the fight? So I think if you want to talk about courage, it's not just the willingness to fight. As far as I'm concerned, it's what you're fighting for. Uh, are you willing to sacrifice to reach a goal? And how much you have to sacrifice, or what it is that you have to sacrifice, to me, that is can be quantified as your courage, as someone's courage. Courage is not taking the path of least resistance if it won't get you to the goals that you are wishing to obtain. And I think we measure a person's courage as of what they're willing to go up against to get what it is that they want. Long as it's not something foolish. And courage is like not taking the easy way out, or the safe way out, the path of least resistance. It's you're willing to weigh the cost of what it is that you are trying to do, or what it is that's opposing you from doing what you're trying to do, and you're willing to carry that burden and to stand when others are choosing to lay down. To me, that characterizes your courage, or something that someone can say is a courage, or that person is courageous. And looking at that definition that I just gave, I see that many of us are lacking in courage, and many of us over the decades have lacked the courage that we used to have as a people. And this is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what's missing in this, not just this generation or the younger generation, what's been missing for the last 40 years in the black community. Courage is when you're willing to speak up when others choose to be silent. And what is it that we sacrifice? Like I said, courage takes a sacrifice. You're willing to sacrifice, not just you're sacrificing something, but you're willing to sacrifice things in order to achieve the goals that you want to achieve, not just for yourself, but for your people, or for your family, or for your future and the future generations. What is it that you are willing to sacrifice? Sometimes the things that we sacrifice are friendships. It could be small things. Sometimes we sacrifice friendships. And it takes courage to do that, because friends comfort us. You're sacrificing those people that you love to be around and love to hang with. And sometimes you sacrifice, and it takes courage to say the things that you need to say when they need to be said. Relationships. Sometimes relationships are sacrificed due to courage. And that's what I'm talking about. When you sacrifice in relationships, or possible relationships, in the face of courage. And the extent of that relationship is how you can measure a person's courage. Are you really willing to sacrifice some of your friendships because you're willing to speak up or stand up, or say what need to be said when things need to be said or done, or do the things that need to be done when they need to be done, even if they're not affecting you? Sometimes it affects our livelihood. And it takes time. Sometimes, and I'm not just talking about, well, this person is speaking up and they're losing their job, or they're losing some position in the community because they're willing to speak up and speak out, or stand up and stand out. Sometimes it takes time away from you in your life in a life that you could be enjoying doing the things that you like to do, but you see a need to stand up and speak out for things that need to be spoken up against or stood up against. Sometimes it's not just fighting immeasurable odds, because sometimes fighting immeasurable odds could be something that's foolish. But learning how to fight an effective fight is more courageous than someone foolishly fighting something that's an immeasurable odd. If you have no other way of doing it but to stand up and fight where you have to fight at and stand where you need to stand, and you have no other options than to face the danger or to fold, then facing that danger, even though those odds may seem to be immeasurable, then that's courageous to do that. And sometimes you lose your health, to do some of the things that needs to be done in the face of courage. And most of all, of course, people lose their lives. You could lose your life. And I heard Martin Luther King say something when Harry Belafonte said his last, he talked to him the day before he died. And I think he gave a speech. And he said, they asked him, "Are you afraid to die?" And of course, already Medgar Evers had been assassinated and Malcolm X had been murdered. And Martin said that, it's not how you live, or it's not basically how you die, it's how you choose to live. And he said he's no longer afraid of death. He had come to that conclusion within himself, that it's more important the way that you live before you die and how you choose to live than the way, or be worried about how you die, or if you're going to die doing the things that you're doing. And when someone can't hold death over your head, then you become the face of danger to someone else. You are the face of courage that becomes the face of danger to your opposition. Because if your opposition has the power, whatever power they have that they could take from you, if I'm not worried about losing my job, and I'm going to say what I need to say, when I need to say it, or how I need to say it, then they have no power over me, because the only thing that they can do, I've taken the power away from them to be able to of doing it. If the only thing or the biggest thing that they could take away from you is your life, and you're willing to sacrifice your life for whatever it is that you feel is worth sacrificing your life, then that moment doesn't have power over you. That situation doesn't have power over you. Those circumstances don't have power over you. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine, and it's just something that brought up, and it was a hypothetical situation. And we were talking about courage, and basically, in so many words, we're talking about courage and stuff, and what you're willing to die for. And the subject is for my family and my kids, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And he was trying to give me a opposing situation, theoretical situation that he laid out. Well, what if this one of your kids fell in a river that was full of alligators or crocodiles or something, like he said? Would you jump in there to try to save that child? And I'm like, yeah, without a doubt. It's not even a second thought. It will probably even be a reaction, because as opposed to a response. A response is something that takes longer, is when you calculate what you're doing. A reaction is immediate. You're just reacting to the action that happened. I told him without a doubt. And he was trying to convince me that wasn't a smart thing to do, even though you were going to die. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Because I already have those things laid out, and I'm conditioned to think the way that for one of my kids, I'm going to die on the spot. And it's not just I'm going to die, they're going to have to kill me, but I'm going to do what it takes to try to save my child. And he said, if you die in the process, then you're leaving the other child alone. Then that child understands the courage that I live on and that I live for, and I'm willing to sacrifice the extent of the courage that I would have. And I believed, and I told him I believed my other child would understand. Because if it was the shoes on the other foot and it was them that fell in, that I would have done the same thing without batting an eye. He disagreed. And in my mind, I'm like, well, that's the courage that you're lacking. You know, many of us need to look for that courage that we had as a people in past generations. I remember sitting at a little group table, or basically like a reunion of friends. And one of the friends came up and he started talking about all this like religious stuff. And he was like, man, you know, and he was Christian, and he started talking about Jesus, you know, and the sacrifice that Jesus made. He said, that's got to be the greatest love of all. Won't y'all agree? And when he got to me, I'm like, I don't think so. And I'm not saying this to knock anybody's beliefs, but I'm looking at things in a logical fashion. This is how I operate. When he said that, I'm like, well, and I'm asking questions. He got upset when I said that. Like, you got to agree to this. I'm like, no, I don't. I said, well, tell me. I said, if I quit a job and my father was a billionaire and I stood up and I did whatever I felt I needed to do, and I got fired from that job, that's not a courageous thing for me to do, because I'm going to be taken care of when I leave my job, basically. And I was given that analogy to say that if you, who you say Jesus is, and Jesus died the way that you say in your religion says that he died for what he said he died, y'all say he died for, then if he already had a relationship with the Creator, and he already knew where he was going after he died, which all of us are going to die, and he was assured of what he was going to be given, or the place he was going to take after death, how courageous is it to die when you know you're being taken care of, as opposed to a father or a mother that's willing to stand up to death and they don't know what's going to happen to them after they die. But what they do know is that they're willing to sacrifice this life. They may not have all, like people say, they may not have all their ducks in order to make it to to heaven or whatever your religion say. But I'm still willing to die and give up this and not have the opportunity to get all my ducks in a row of whatever religion that person may believe in. To me, that's a greater sacrifice. When you're willing to give up the known for the unknown and for the uncertain. And so he kind of was, I guess he stayed pissed off. But this is me thinking the way I think. And it depends on what you're willing to give up to say that something is courageous, or have the courage of what you're doing. Like I said, I'm not trying to knock anyone's belief. And this is just the way I thought, you know. And when we talk about, like with our people, we have been imprinted with this Christian mindset. And that was a sacrifice. That's not my belief system, as y'all could probably tell. But I remember conversations with people, and I asked them, I'm saying, the reason that you're giving and the logic that you're giving, if you're holding something on this pedestal and you're thinking you can never achieve it, if you're thinking you will never sacrifice, and I told the guy when he was talking, I said, I would sacrifice for my family and loved ones, because we're all going to die. So why am I trying to save my life and watch others die around me when it's something I could have done? So that was the conversation that I was having, and that came to mind when I was thinking of this show, these conversations that I had with people about being courageous, or what we see as courage, and we see others having courage, and the courage that we're not willing to do or to give or to exemplify. And we have to look within ourselves. And we have to look in the mirror and see the face of courage if we wish to achieve the things that we want to achieve in this life with the perils that we're facing and the obstacles that's before us. And I had someone from, they're younger than me, and some of the things that I do, and they're finding our history. And when I'm saying they're finding our history, I think that they're, instead of looking at the past, this Afrocentric mindset, they are looking at our more recent history in America. It's some of the courageous things that we have done in the last 100 years that has been buried to many of us. So they're like a generation younger than me, and they're finding some of these things. And they sent me something on a documentary that I implore some of y'all to look up. I know it's on Prime, and on YouTube, I believe you have to pay like $4 to get the documentary. It's like an hour and a half documentary, and it's basically on the Black Power movement. And the name of it is the Black Power Mixtapes. And it's done by an independent, I'm going to say an independent film crew. They're from Sweden. And they came and they were getting it, they wanted to do a documentary and interview on some of the members of the Black Power movement. You know, some of the people that was in the Black Panther Party. They were doing a documentary, and it's real good. And the person, they sent it to me, they said, "Have you seen this?" And I was like, "Nah, I haven't seen it, but maybe I'll check it out." So when I checked it, ended up looking at it, they had a discussion. They were saying the younger generation, because what you're seeing is us, is the years is from 60, I believe maybe 67 to 75. I believe that was it's something, it's called the Black Power Mixtape, and it gives like a date line, 69 to 75 or something like that. Or maybe 67, I say that, because they did catch some Malcolm X, they did catch some Martin Luther King, and they caught Angela Davis and Stokely Carmichael, some of the speeches and some of the interviews that he gave with them, and some of his more well documented interviews. And it's a very good snapshot of the movement. And they didn't cover everyone in the movement, but they did a very good job. And I implore y'all to look it up. It's called the Black Power Mixtape. But it's by, like, Europeans come over here and they're hearing all this stuff that's happening in America, and they did a document of the facts, or what they saw was happening. And it's a powerful thing. But anyway, the younger person was like, it seems like, and this is not just with this documentary, because I heard them say it before. They asked to borrow books, and I gave them the book on the Sada, and I don't know if they read the Stokely Carmichael book, but I gave them books, and it's like things that they're unraveling about their own past, about our past. And the person made the comment, it's like they were so different back then. And when she's saying they, she's talking about us. And she was saying basically that the youth, because all of these people that was in this movement, it wasn't the older generation that was necessarily spearheading the movement. This was the youth, and they were in their 20s and things like this. Stokely Carmichael, before he came Kwame Ture, he was in SNCC, college students. And Asada, she was young. When she was a teenager, she heard about the whole thing in Oakland at the courtroom, and she was wondering, how did these young boys that broke into the courtroom, why did they do it? They was killed in the process. The Soledad brother, the whole book, the whole Soledad thing, trying to break out their older brother. But she, it's like, and she joined the movement. That was a motivation for her to join the Black Power movement, the Black Panther Power movement. Now, they had other Black Power movements, of course, but this was something that motivated her to do something with herself. I think she said in her book she was like 16 when she read the story, and it's like, I got to find out more. And this young lady, she was saying, well, it's with all of this information that they're gathering, the generations are different than my generation is or was. And I kind of took that, I reflected upon that. And I was like, I haven't thought about it like that. Even looking at my generation, that's right. Because I could have said the same thing, that generation was different than my generation. The whole 60s, the whole 50s. I'm going to go back to the 50s and maybe before that. You know that, and it's not just the Black Power movement, because I'm coming to grips that even with the Civil Rights movement, many of them were younger. They were the younger generation that stood up when many of the adults did not choose to stand. And that took courage to, even when it's different when you're a younger person. If you're in your 20s and your dad was like that, your mom was like that. It's different when they are not like that. And you're stepping away from the boundaries that they are confining themselves into. So that takes a whole different courage to step away from the group or step away from the household, step away from the family and stand up when your own family members are not standing up. Or when people around you that's older than you, that's supposed to be protecting you, when they are not even standing up. When you are in some type of religious institution or group, and the institution and the group is not standing up with you, and you're stepping out of the confines and the comforts of your own religion and your own community, when everybody in the community is not doing what you are willing to do, that takes courage. And I didn't even look at it like that. I'm like, when I was 20 years old, what was it that I was thinking, and what was it that I was trying to do? I can't say that they had a better education than I did. I can't say that they had a better upbringing than I did. When I was younger, we had, my dad was into education, into reading, and he enforced that. Sometime with a belt on his shoulder. He enforced. We had the autobiography of Malcolm X in my household. Many of my friends didn't have that book, and they didn't find that book until they was much later in life. And it was an eye-opening thing for them. But at least I had that at my disposal. I probably didn't read it when I was younger at that age, but I knew that it was in my house, and it sparked a curiosity when I saw it later. What was this actually about? So why was it that my generation was not even doing the courageous things of generations of the past? That was a question that I should have been asking, but when somebody made that statement, looking and reflecting on their own generation, then I had to think about that. I'm like, you're right. And it was like, well, why? Then I had to look at myself and say, well, you know what? My generation wasn't like that. And if I look at some of those people, even some of the people that I have on my wall, and a lot of people that I have omitted, that are not purposely, I don't have the space to put on my wall. I had a guest one time from Chi-Town, from Chicago, and he said, man, that's nice, but where's Fred Hampton? I'm like, well, brother, I can't put everybody up here. But I'm looking at Huey P. Newton, 24 years old, and he started the Black Party, the Black Panther Party. 24 years old. What was I doing when I was 24 years old? What was happening in his life that prompted him to say we need a party, and a party that was powerful, the party that spanned across continents? It was a Black Panther Party in Europe, in London. It was a Black Panther Party in Australia with the Aborigines. You started something in your neighborhood that went from the West Coast to the East Coast. They had a Black Panther Party in New York. They had a Black Panther Party in the Carolinas. They had a Black Panther Party in Chicago. And all over. And you started something when you was 24. And not only just starting something, but to stay with something that became the face of danger to the government. So much so that the government and the FBI created a program to dismantle, and not just dismantle, but to destroy and murder your members and your leadership. And you stayed in that to fight the government. When you have the governor of your state, Ronald Reagan, going after you and your members, and he became president, that's having courage. Not just starting an organization, but standing standing in the situation that they are putting in front of you, the obstacles. They're smearing your name. That takes courage. That's the face of courage. When I look at Fred Hampton, who later became, and I say later, he died when he was 21. At 19 years old, Fred Hampton in Chicago, 19 years old. He was being so active in the community. His activism had him being watched by the FBI at 19. And it led to him being murdered at the age of 21 in a conspiracy between the police department and the federal government. 21 years old, being murdered by the government because you are so powerful and active in your community, and you are part of a party. You become part of a party that the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, considered one of the most dangerous things to this country. And if you look at what they were doing, you will understand why, or you should try to understand why was they so dangerous to this country. And not just that they was carrying guns, they had a right to carry guns. They were talking about protecting themselves. That wasn't a threat to this country. The mindset and the programs that they were trying to implement, the help that they were trying to provide to a people that seemed like they were in a helpless situation, that the government was opposed to helping. The government was putting us in these situations. This is somebody that was trying to create a life raft. And they became enemies of the state before they were 25 years old. Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the '68 Olympics in Mexico. They were 24 and 23-year-old men that stood up in front of the world with a protest to protest the inhumane treatment that was going on back in America to their people, with their people. And it cost them. And they knew that that taking this stance was going to cost them, and it cost them dearly. It cost them marriages. It cost them friends. They had no one to help. They had no jobs waiting for them. And they went through that. But they chose to make a stand, to stand up and let the world know what was happening back home. We're running for a country that's running our people down into the ground. That takes courage, because you know what's going to happen. And none of the people that you displayed this protest to, they didn't come to our aid. You were just letting them know, giving them the information. That takes courage. When Malcolm X was free from his incarceration, he was 27 years old. And he was 27 years old and he became a prominent speaker in the Nation of Islam. He could have got out and did whatever he wanted to do with his life in the 8 years that he lost, or the 6 years that he lost when he was being incarcerated. And he chose to be a speaker in an organization that was hell-bent on helping his people. And he became a prominent speaker, outspoken, confronted on the news at times, talk shows that had no other intent but to embarrass him or try to expose him in his speakings and the teachings that Elijah Muhammad was giving them. And he stood tall on all these talk shows. And sometimes he was being invited to the most prestigious institutions. And sometimes they'll have somebody there that looked like him to try to oppose him and his teaching. Sometimes they got someone famous to try to oppose what he was saying, to give us that appearance that, hey, y'all don't have to listen to this guy. We got somebody else that look like you that's opposing him. One of the people that was on that they made competitors with him was Martin Luther King Jr., who was 26 years old when he started his movement. The Southern Christian Leadership Council, 26 years old. when he started his movement. And he had a young 23-year-old Jesse Jackson that joined his movement. And all the burden that comes with being in that civil rights movement, going against the government. This is what some of these people I'm talking about, all of these people that I'm naming, Huey Newton, Fred Hampton, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, those are well known. They were all starting or engaging in movements that was going against the government, not the gang on the other side of town, not the brothers that go to this high school, or not these East Coast, West Coast, down south, entertainers going against each other because of where they live and where they come from, or my city is the hardest and all this stuff. These were people that were starting movements and joining movements that was going against the government for our health and well-being. That's the face of courage. Then we have Claudette Colvin, that many people in the black community don't know her name, but they heard of Rosa Parks, who came later, that was staged in the same type of protest that this young 15-year-old teenager did without being backed by the NAACP or any organization, not being backed by her mother, her father, or her family anywhere, not even being backed by the people that sat on the bus with her when she got on the bus and decided that the way that we have been living and being treated with the bus and having to give up our seats, you had a line where the blacks had to be in the back, period. And if the front of the bus filled up with white people and the white person needed your seat, it was basically illegal for a white person to stand and a black person to be sitting in this country on public transportation. And she said to herself, that's not right. That's the face of courage. No one else on that bus, none of the adults, was there saying that they was going to back her. And I believe two people did say that, you know what, she did it, she started it. And she's like, no, I'm not giving up my seat. And the bus driver was like, what? Hey, you know the law, you know the rules. And she was drug off the bus. Feet first. He pulled over, called the police. This black woman, a black girl, is not giving up her seat to a white person. And this prompted the stage of Rosa Parks' protest. It was staged. It wasn't a reaction or something. It was a response to Claudette Colvin. But we don't know her name, but she stood up with courage. The face of courage is what she wore. That many of the adults have been riding that bus all day, all year, and probably would have continued to do it if she had not stood up. And that started the whole civil rights thing with Martin Luther King, the NAACP, the whole bus boycott that changed the course of action. That was a course of action that changed this country. And then those people that stood by it, that said, no, we're going to boycott. We're not going to, and the leadership said, hey, this is what we're going to do to change things. And it took courage for everyone to either walk to where they needed to go or to get a carpool. And we didn't have a lot of cars, not nearly as many cars as the other people that was in that city or town. We didn't have the money like they had. Someone had a car, they was living beyond the means of many of the rest of us. But we boycotted for a year, basically a year. And we waited them out because they felt that we was going to fold. But that took courage for that whole community to stand together with each other. It took a face of courage, and it got things done. So my question is, what happened? How did we fumble the courage ball? At what point did we fumble the courage ball? On this documentary, if y'all look it up, you're going to see the things that the government did to swipe the movements that was happening. And it was basically are done again and again. It's the same thing. The same thing they did with the drugs in my era of coming up with the crack, putting the crack in our neighborhood, the Iran Contra thing. They did that actually in the 70s. They pumped heroin in our neighborhoods and had heroin babies being born that was going to affect them for the rest of their lives. And you'll see it in the documentary if you ever look it up. And many of us don't recall. We see the movies about Nicky Bonds and Frank Lucas and all these things like this, but you don't see the government being behind that. You know, and it repeated itself in the 80s when things started getting popular. With as far as positivity became popular, we was Generation X. We was wearing Malcolm X hats and Malcolm X shirts, and we had pendants that had Malcolm X on it. And many of us became conscious. That was like a conscious movement for my generation coming up. And it was cool to be conscious, to know your history, to know who Patrice Lumumba was. You know, to know all of these names that many of us wasn't taught in schools, who Stevie Biko was, those people that was in the African continent, the movements that happened, to know who Marcus Garvey was, to speak on W.E.B. Du Bois and his philosophy. That became popular with younger people. When I asked myself, what was I doing when I was 20? That's what I was doing. I had got into that mindset. And I was dressing like that. I was wearing the beads. I was doing all this type of stuff. And I wasn't getting, the music that I listened to had to be inspirational. And I was refusing to listen to some of the stuff that other people, some of the people my age was. It was split. It was like some of us was listening to, you know, the dance stuff or whomever, and some of us was listening to only the positivity. But that became a movement. That movement became dangerous. And what happened was a response by the government. It became crack cocaine. And the crack dealers became part of the music. People started talking about selling crack and making money and doing all these type of things. Other of us have become victims of it. If not personally, and not directly, but indirectly. My family members, this person's mother, you heard of this, or this classmate, or whatever. That became a way, same way that they did in the 70s, that they turned around and did again. Because things became dangerous. The face of courage to take on that movement, to change your mindset, and to sacrifice the things that you like to do and have fun as a young man or woman or young boy or girl. The courage that we had was to take on this Black Panther Party, this Black Power movement, and learning who these people were. And if I knew somebody that you didn't know, everybody knew who Marcus Garvey was in the movement. Everyone knew who Du Bois was. But if I come up with somebody and they're going to be like, oh man, in their mind, they're going to be like, oh man, who was that person he named? I don't want to sound like I'm not down. So they'll go look it up. And that's how that movement was. It was a bunch of young people on a positive path to learn about the history of this country. To learn about what Farrakhan, and listen to Farrakhan, and listen to old cassettes of Malcolm X, and to listen to Garvey, and we'll pass that information around. We'll look up books and say, hey, do you have this book? They came before Columbus, Ida Van Sertima. Do you have this book? Oh man, The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, you know, and it's like, oh, if you got something that I don't have, and everybody wanted something, because everybody wanted to be part of that in crowd of being conscious and pro-black and Afrocentric. And what they did, they had a Black Contra movement, which was to pump the drugs into our neighborhood. They filtered us out. They suffocated the music, and they pumped other popular artists to the forefront, and they had us shaking our butt and backing that thing up and doing all these type of things. They hijacked the movement. In the face of courage, that ball was fumbled. And the face of courage never folded in the face of danger in the past. So I don't know if it was the face of danger that made us, many of us, or that's making us not choose the face of courage today. Because we complain about a lot of the things that's happening, but many of us are not being courageous and saying, you know what, This is what we need to do. Or I have to figure out a plan to make my goals or the goals of my people. You can have your personal goals. You can reach your personal goals. You could become a dentist or a ball player or whatever it is. But then you got to look at our people and say, but this is not the goals. You set goals. You could set many goals. You don't have to just have one goal in life to make the job or to get the job you want or make the money you want. You have to have goals for you. You have to have goals for your family. You have to have goals for the future of your family. You have to have goals for your people, your community. So when you're sitting there making it and you want to move out of your community, then you're fumbling the courage ball, because it's not about getting away from the problems. It's about trying to solve the problems. Harriet Tubman got away from her problem, but it didn't stop there. She went back to get more, to save them from the problems that she escaped. She risked her own life. That was the face of courage. Not for yourself, but for others. She had reached safety. She could have just lived to be an old woman and say, yeah, that's what I went to or went through, but she went back to help others. This is the mindset that many of us have got to have, or we should have. And sometimes they put danger in our face. And sometimes we have to face that danger with courage. And they put obstacles in our way. And sometimes we have to go through those obstacles with courage, because when they set the obstacles in your way, the reason they're setting them in your path is because the path that you're on, they want to slow you down or curtail your movement. They want you to choose a path of least resistance. And if you choose that path, then guess what? You won't have to go through those obstacles. That's how they're planning it out for us. And we have to be courageous enough to say that I'm going to go through that. I'm going to do what I need to do because my goals is bigger than myself. Everyone that I was naming, some of them became martyrs because their goal took their lives. The path that they were on meant that their lives were going to be taken. And even though they had different ways of trying to achieve the goals, it didn't matter. The fact that you have a goal, whether your goal was nonviolent, your goal is a silent protest, it doesn't matter. Your goal is a vocal protest, it doesn't matter. They're not against the way you protest. They're against the goals that you have and how effective your goals are. So this is what we have to, or we need to, look at. And sometimes the face of courage is going to face danger. And I'm wondering, how do we get to that point that we no longer are willing to sacrifice even the smallest inconveniences and luxuries to achieve goals as a people? Or maybe because we're not even looking at each other as a group. Maybe we're not looking at each other as brothers and sisters. Maybe we're only looking at our immediate family members, and sometimes it's not even that. Everyone is on their own path, whatever the reason is. We are no longer at the point that we are willing to sacrifice even the smallest inconveniences and luxuries of life to achieve the goals that we need to achieve, even if it means for our future, the future of our offspring. And I pondered, did they make us just so comfortable, just comfortable enough to not see a need to fight? That's the question that I had. Did they give us just enough to make us be quiet or not be willing to fight the path and the cause? Or not even to see goals within our people? And I know it's a lot of different things that they've done. It's a complex movement. Now I'm going to read some of the comments. I appreciate some of y'all that showed up. I'm going to start at the top. I appreciate Sakina. She said, Assalamu alaikum, walaikum assalam, sister. Sharon Simpson Anderson, she said, Hotep, I appreciate you showing up. And Ellen Hightower, she said, hey, Kev, I appreciate you showing up. Jasmine Jackson, she had a comment. She said, appreciate you showing up, by the way. She said, White Boy Rick shows some of what them pushing the drugs in our neighborhood. In many of these shows that come on, they're going to show a snippet of it. That's why I didn't really watch like whatever it was, a Snowfall, something like that, because it's not getting to. You're trying to show the first drug dealers and they're black, whatever. I wanted the first drug dealer was President Reagan. The Iran Contra situation. Those were the drug dealers, the plugs that put the drugs in those black people's hands. That's the same thing that happened, or the ones that turned their back and let them put drugs in our neighborhood, that knew the drugs was going in our neighborhood. Those are the real dealers in our community. That's why I don't watch a lot of these shows, because if they're not telling the real story that came from the government, then it doesn't mean anything to me. They're making it look as if we just did it to ourselves, and many times in a way, indirectly, directly, some of it was us, and indirectly it was a purpose behind it, and perpetrators beyond the system of the intermediate drug dealers in our community. It was people that were supplying us with the drugs and turning their back to the drug dealers. They gave the drug dealers weapons and stuff. They set things up. So I don't watch shows now, but you will look at like White Boy Rick shows and things like that, and some of these other shows that's going to show the elite level of drug dealing in this country. I appreciate that. I appreciate that comment. And Teresa Lewis, she said, I believe growing up hearing about civil rights movement made a lot of us start having a sense of complacency. Yeah, and I think because they felt like they show us and they say that we've achieved, we've reached that, and that they were successful and everything like this. And then what we're looking at today, the same thing. When we were growing up, we heard about all this stuff, or King did this and all these things happening, and that changed America. America hasn't really changed. Not the way that we needed to change, not the way I needed to change for my grandkids and their kids. Because if we stay on this path that we're on, they're gonna still continue to have the same problems that we're having, if not be worse. I appreciate that comment. Ellen said, I think that's definitely part of the issue. And what I'm getting at, what I appreciate, we have to look at what happened. This is something, when we look in the mirror, we should see the face of courage. When we put a mirror to our neighborhood, we should see the face of courage. And that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing complaints about what's happening and what's going on. And Teresa said having assets also cause us to be hesitant to be courageous and take a stand. In those that have assets, I agree with that. I always tell me and my homeboy, we talk about that. We're older, and when you get older, you start having mortgages. You get older, you start having responsibilities. And I hate to say it like that, because when it's your people, all of us have a responsibility. That's how I see it. Me having the comfort of a home and all these things doesn't mean that our people is not in peril, and the peril is not going to be there anymore. So this is how I look at that. And I know what you're saying is 100% true, because that's how we look at it. Hey, I got all this stuff going on. Hey, I can't do this and do that. But I look at those people in the 60s. I look at those people, those young people that didn't have homes and things like that. And they went out and they made sacrifices. They went out and they built things. And they stood. And, they stood 10 toes down when the government was opposing them. So those are the things that I'm talking about, that where are the young people at? Why are we not encouraging the young people to be the faces of courage that we need in our community? Where are we at as a people that we don't have the ball to pass to them and the information to pass to them? What's going on that we can't even comprehend. And when younger people, I'm sorry, I'm looking at messages on my phone. When younger people are trying to fight, many times it is us that get in their way. This is what I think, that we have to ask the questions and get the answers. The right question is sometimes better than the right answer. So this is what I'm thinking about when I'm looking at these shows like that. This is what someone else made me look at, and I was like, okay, you're right. But I'm looking at it in my sense. Where was I at? What was I doing? And then I remember, yeah, I was part of a movement, but what happened to it? How did they curtail us from our movement that we was on when we were the ones that was trying to be conscious? How did they disrupt the movement and the lust and the hunger for education and information? And this is what I was thinking about. I appreciate Aisha Ray for showing up, and Ellen, she said, I grew up so poor that we were just taught to survive, and that's a tactic that they use. That you're just trying to survive, and when sometimes, but this is one of the things that I'm going to say this. If you watch this documentary, Ellen, I'm going to talk about what you just said. It was a lady in Brooklyn. She had 10 kids. They didn't have milk. She was breast, whatever. Had a baby with a bottle, and it was kids. She said the older kids didn't get to eat because the younger kids needed to eat that morning. They had cereal without milk, and it was like, eat the cereal dry. It was things like that. And they were, but what was happening with the Black Power, the Black Panther organization, they created a food program. So with your situation, if you were so poor that you couldn't concentrate on anything else, this is why the Black Panther Party came up with an organization. When they project them to us, it's all about them holding guns. That was so much. That was just defense of the things that they wanted to implement. They had programs that the government took up. They destroyed their organization and took some of the programs and implemented the food stamp thing, the breakfast programs and all this stuff like that. They were into helping the community. Fred Hampton, when he was 19 years old, he was having something in his community. He was gathering people. Let's make some lunches or breakfast for some of these kids, like the situation I was talking about in Brooklyn where some of the kids couldn't eat. They were sending them kids to school on a full stomach. So that was an organization that they started that would have helped the situation, because this is part of the plan. If you're so worried about your problems, you can't worry about other people's problems or the problems of your people. And they understood that. So we got to have at least the same effort or the same courage that they had to create things, because some of us, like with time, we may have a mortgage and things like this, and I may buy clothes and stuff like that, because I'm doing all this stuff because I don't see the fact that some of us are hungry and some of our kids are starving on the way to school, or whatever situation that the government is putting the obstacles. We have to be able, if we're able to remove some of those obstacles, so some of us can have the mindset that we need us to have. We should be alleviating some of the obstacles ourselves instead of running to the polls to try to get people to alleviate some of these obstacles, and they're just alleviating a little bit, making us just so comfortable that we're content. And that's what I'm saying. I appreciate the comment, because that's true. Many of us are worried about tomorrow, and we're not worried about our grandkids. We're not worried about the future, because we're worried about tomorrow's mortgage, or tomorrow's bills, tomorrow's rent, tomorrow's food on the table. And I understand that. So we have to get together and be willing to sacrifice to make the goal in the road easier for the rest of us. So I appreciate those comments. So my thing is, it is imperative that we figure this out. What happened to the courage? What happened to us creating organizations? And even though if you look at this documentary, it shows a lot of different things. Stokely Carmichael was totally opposed to Martin Luther King's nonviolent movement. And he says that, but he wasn't going to get in Martin Luther King's way. And he said that Martin Luther King set an example that even if you do it this way, they're going to still punch you in the face, spray you with water hoses, and basically murder you. So that made the Black Power movement even more important in his eyes. I appreciate everyone that showed up, all the comments that was made. Hopefully I have a better show for y'all next week. Peace. Kevin Lewis on the Blueprint.